my friend, my colleague, Dr. W. David O. Taylor. We have embarked on and now brought to completion, well, not even, actually, we've started a project. I was gonna say brought to completion, but we've just launched it, really. A kind of thing that we were handed as academics, as scholars, as theological educators, that we decided in our infinite wisdom to sort of upend and rethink. So why don't you just sort of say, here's what we wanted to do with this thing that we've initiated, and a bit of what we had hoped would happen because of it.
Okay, so as you remember, we were invited to organize the Payton Lectures, which is a traditional kind of lecture series where one person is invited to give 2 talks, right? And then some people respond. And you and I were wondering out loud to ourselves, not just if it could be something else, but in light of the fact that it's during COVID, right? All of our classes are online. There's a steep learning curve in learning how to do online. And then there's just a lot of anxiety, like understandable amongst some of us as faculty, about how do we do this well and what's happening to our bodies and is it disembodied? And so then because we felt like we had so little time as a community of faculty to think through this issue that was a real-time issue. It's not like we can stop teaching to figure out how to teach. We just decided to turn the lectures into an excuse to think through deeply over the course of a day and a half, what is the nature of embodied theological education in a disembodied age, right? This because we're not assuming that those terms are self-evident. And then, I can't remember, what the exact process of it was, but felt like if it is sort of a team effort to figure out what theological education, can and should be and will be at its best in the future, then that's probably like a team effort that requires team discernment, communal debate, and we needed time. So we ended up inviting 9 people, 2 of which partnered. So we had 8 presentations from 9 people from distinctive fields as a way to say, hey, bring the knowledge and insight, the treasures of your field to the table for the sake of wisdom, right? And then we would spend a day and a half. And so the long and short of it is we framed this as a laboratory experiment because we really weren't sure how it would work out, but that everybody would bring a works in progress rather than a final paper. We would be dialoguing rather than monologuing, and then it would eventually lead towards other kinds of products. Ultimately a book, but we have been talking about the possibility of meeting again before it goes to publications so that our work can really be kind of interanimating each other. So we're really asking the question, in a future that is increasingly online or digital, how do we think about embodiedness? And then it was not a boring conference at all.
Not at all. And, you're raising issues, I think, as we first started talking, and then as we started enacting the process, right? We started encountering these hurdles right away that, you and I had talked and like, oh, here's this idea, like, what you just described. And then we're like, let's go do it. And most of the time we spent initially, planning, logistics, dates, times, that sort of stuff. Budgets. Okay, there's that. But then as soon as we started the work of basically checking our assumptions at the door, we realized everyone had very different assumptions, not only about what a conference is, right. And the last 2.5 years of conference going, it always was virtual and nothing was dependable or stable. So you could even sign up for a conference and maybe it's in person, maybe it's not, So there was that, just the basic commitment to the conference.
Right.
There's then, what am I asked to do as a speaker, presenter?
Right.
And the sort of the bar, the threshold of commitment that requires. And then this act or process of scholarship, which is generally a very sort of isolating, individualized thing where you come out and present your great wisdom and you hope no one tears it apart. But even if they do, maybe you'll take some notes. So it was it was high commitment by the participants. It was inherently collaborative. It was, as you said, a work in progress. And then ultimately not lecture, but dialogue.
Yeah.
And each of those points to me is two things. One, it is good pedagogy. And that's what we wanted to do, the thing we were talking about. But two, it works against all of the habits and practices that we have been shaped in as scholars. Do you see any others besides those four that I was mentioning that we were immediately encountering, not resistance, but clear different expectations in terms of what we were asking people to do?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. And there's an element of risk and vulnerability involved in this. Like, for better and for worse, as scholars, we want to do excellent work that is received with respect and that it makes a difference in the world. And so we work very hard to craft essays and books that, best as we can make them, are clear from beginning to end and have a through line called a thesis. And it persuades the reader or institutions, of one sort or another. This conference, it's not that we're trying to upend things because those other models, are fundamentally, broken in some way. It's just the nature of the task, I think, demanded entering into this open-handed. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out or whether what I'm bringing to the table is really actually excellent, because we're inviting people to bring works in progress. And what's a work in progress for you may be different from me for personality reasons, professional, disciplinary reasons. So I think people did come with a measure of understandable anxiety. And so I think that's why it's so important that you and I and the rest of the team involved made hospitality a high priority, to say, in as much as we're inviting your whole humanity into this, not just kind of what's in here and what's coming out of your mouth, then we want there to be a fighting chance for us to have an exchange where we can take risks with each other. So the setting is risky, vulnerable, but in order to really think through, we have to be willing to say hard things or to get it wrong or to swing for the field or the left, whatever. What is it, swing for the?
Fences?
Fences, yeah. And basically, it's okay to keep getting it wrong, because the purpose is not to get it right on one. The purpose is for us to just keep sort of saying, well, what about this? What about this? In a way that requires us to divest ourselves of self-sufficiency or self-competency or self-protection, because, well, that's not going to get us at our communal, discernment. And so, long and short of it is, I think people were very nervous coming into it, and like, how is it going to be received? And is it going to be right? But I think we had good people that were willing to take that risk.
I agree, and part of it is also, what is the product, right? Like, what is the thing that comes out of it? What, when I'm investing my time and energy, there's some return on that investment.
Yes,
what is
exactly.
it? And the former, maybe I'll say, maybe we didn't agree to upend, or weren't trying. I always try to upend things. That's just sort of my thing. But one is sort of, and the sort of two parallel tracks. One is my ongoing question of, okay, maybe now you're an institution that does theological education. And so a lecture series is not uncommon. Like, you do these events, you have people speak, and you usually try to get a headliner or something. And that can be valuable. But in terms of like our larger project of we're doing this thing called theological education, my thing is like, well, what does a lecture series do exactly? Other than give a platform for somebody to, tell people their stuff, lecture at them, right?
Yes.
And so for me, I was thinking through, okay, if nothing else, and I think there's a lot of byproducts of this, if nothing else, we can accomplish a couple things. And one, and some of it's rooted in what the people brought. One is thinking through this notion of creating a hospitable space where we, maybe not upend, but rethink what a collegial community looks like. We had to create that, and we had to fight for it. We had to like demand people's time when they didn't always want it. So there's that. The other is this space for us to say, if we as a faculty are going to do and rethink and reimagine our pedagogy in terms of bodies. And we're trying to do all this with less and less and less and less time.
Right.
So let's carve out some time. Let's resist that and create a kind of sacred space, and requires you to set something else aside that you might otherwise do. And again, the product isn't necessarily, okay, now we can sell a book or whatever, but we inhabited a life-giving space as scholars, and we did the thing that we're good at, and that is thinking deeply with each other for a amount of time, and the subject is one that we need to commit this time to, and we haven't been given that time. So those were my two sort of, if nothing else, we've got that. Do you have an if nothing else, we at least have this in mind that you had in mind, or that maybe emerged without you thinking that would happen?
Yeah, I mean, time always seems to be scarce. As academics, we never have enough time, right, to get the thing that we really want to get done. And so we're understandably protective of our time. What we're asking these 9 people is to give up a lot of time that they could have been spending elsewise, advancing kind of the field. So if nothing else, we have at least asked the question, is there another way of being a scholar, academic, theologian, who is not simply the isolated individual going to their thinking closet, thinking through the ideas, researching, coming up with a final product, maybe getting 1 or 2 other people to chime in, and then going to publication. It's a very, very, not autonomous, but it's a very, very individual and lonely kind of experience. Could it be more communal in some fashion? So, could that have been a benefit of this? And then solving a problem, right? It's either a committee or a person that usually solves a problem in our educational institutions. But what if we spent an extraordinary amount of time, which is what it feels like to spend a day and a half together, jointly together saying, here's what I'm bringing to the table. It's a work in progress. There are a lot of gaping holes. There are a lot of assumptions that I haven't named. There are a lot of, twists and turns that have no logical connection. But I think there's something, on offer here. And for people to receive it hospitably and say, yes, and here's, some thoughts. And so to encourage each other. So we're learning together, we're discerning, we're figuring things out in a togetherness, but it's time. Who has the time, right, to do this? But again, perhaps if nothing else, then we made this laboratory experiment for a day and a half. I think it was a relatively successful experiment in the sense that each of us felt very charged, challenged, questioned, encouraged, helped, genuinely helped. Our ideas got better. Whatever we write will be better. It would just be a finer wine or a finer spaghetti sauce. And that just, it seems to me why wouldn't we at least attempt something like that as academics who are Christians?
Yeah. So one thing that we encountered were some unexpected hurdles with our colleagues, with ourselves, with planning.
Yes.
Anything you would do differently, given the chance?
Okay, I'll tell you what I would do the same. If I could make every lecture series, in every divinity school and every seminary, which is very presumptuous of me, but if I could make every one like this, more dialogical, more the clay is wet on the material, works in progress, and more sort of this sort of rich layering where you have people from different fields, not just all philosophical theologians or all Reformed theologians or all biblical scholars or ethicists, but people from different, that's just very fertile, dynamic kind of space, which I think would yield surprising benefit to those who would say, I don't think I could ever learn something from that person in that field. I would do that every single time because I think there's something truly, it crackles with a kind of energy. It's sweet sauce. What I would do differently is I would probably try to figure out how to make my instruction or invitation or the task at hand more clear, more specific, more kind of focused, because what we got, which is fine, but we got papers that covered, this universe of possibility and interest and concern around embodiment. And I realized, we were just talking across so much territory. And I think we might have benefited just saying, let's talk about embodiment as it relates to teaching, or I don't know, being a faculty person or something like that. So I felt like maybe the camera lenses was just like having a hard time knowing where to focus. Yeah. And so that I would do differently.
Yeah. I, kind of a little too late in the game, realized, we had asked certain things and you and I had something in mind.
Yes,
and then we realized, that's not what our presenters actually had in mind in terms of a conference.
Right.
In their mind, with some cases, like, okay, I have to give a 5-minute presentation. Right. And that's it. So I'll come for you. No, we want a day and a half. We want not just 5 minutes, but a pretty well fleshed out idea, interaction with others, which requires a lot of time. Right. So somehow, and I thought we did, but going back and going, okay, we need to clarify at every stage what we're asking.
Yes.
And specifically the things that, and I think this is what I didn't realize, is how that's counter to all the ways they'd been asked the same thing the last 2.5 years. So like recognizing the moment we're in, and what our words mean. So that's one thing I might do differently. Yeah. The other is I would have liked to, and we tried it at first, is our actual space. I pretty much anticipated about the physical audience we had, and we did a good job of trying to limit it and make it VIP, and fine. But knowing that our first vision was really reflective of what we were doing, which is essentially a round table with like sort of concentric circles of whoever showed up. And I think that even would have made it less to the presenters and think even more a dialogue and less I'm here to present something. Yeah. So that would be my other, I would do that differently.
Right.
But
I mean, obviously making the point that body posture is everything. Because we're oriented out, it's more like we are presenting a thing to humans who are observing as spectators. Whereas a round table really would have been, okay, this is like meal kind of setting.
And even stadium seating implies like, this is the important, this is where the important stuff happens.
I mean, I would say like if I could go back in time, I would get it right. Because I want to do it right because I think that's a part hospitality. But it's being okay with having gotten it wrong and saying, it's okay, it's not the end of the world.
If we think about the process that you and I tried to put together for our participants, does that translate into the classroom and the church? That's my open question now. And if so, how? Are we, so one thing, I love this idea of rethinking theological education, and part of that includes what does it mean to be a scholar academic? But then we're charged with the educational task of we now have students who are leading congregations or other things. Is it going to come down to it's the content that the presenters and other authors are doing that'll be what translates, or is there something about what we did that we might bring into the classroom, into the church?
Well, I mean, I would say two things. If the primary job of an academic, of a theologian, in our case, is to share, dispense, give students the highest quality knowledge in the most effective and efficient way possible. Lecture, a monologue, a seminar, a discussion, then we should invest all our time, money, and energy to be the best version of that. If, however, that's not the best way to be a teacher, a doctor of the church, to use that old-fashioned language, if there are other ways that students will have more rich and richly resonant kind of learning experiences, then it's going to require us to unlearn a mode that we have been habituated in and been persuaded to be the singular way to be an effective, scholar, academic, theologian, teacher. And so if we have maybe had this experience over the last couple of days where we are inviting others into a process like, hey, I'm not going to figure out how to be the best scholar teacher on my own, so speak into it, then I think that's a gift that we would take with us from this and then continue to ask ourselves as the years go on, how might I take time, money, and energy? Because it's always time, money, and energy, right? To say, okay, I'm going to use some of my week to email Cutter and to call Jeanette Oak and to have a conversation with Sunchan Ra to say, I got this thing, would you speak into it? They have to be willing to give up their time, money, and energy, right? But I think that's going to make us categorically better teachers and provide categorically better learning experiences. And if the final end is wisdom, not simply smartness, not simply effectiveness in certain kind of, on certain metrics, but is wisdom, knowing how to live well. That is a time-intensive, relationally demanding, but always worthwhile. So if we take that away from this, which I don't know if we will, because we're so hardwired to go solo, but at least we've had our appetites whetted.
Yeah. Tomorrow will come with its time demands, right?
Yes.
It may revert. Yeah. I was thinking, as you're talking, it makes me think of, Sung Chan has written on this, but not the presentation he gave, but talking about, and he's, I think, talking about evangelicals in particular.
Yeah, sure.
Being basically this vision of possessing truth versus pursuing truth. He's like, we need to be...
He used the language of stewarding as well.
Oh, maybe it's stewarding.
Like in his presentation, yeah. Which I thought was great.
Yeah. And I'm just like, ooh, that's a bit of what we're getting at. A lot of times, scholarship is, I possess the truth that I've discerned.
Right.
And when that's the mode, even when you enter peer review, right. It becomes, you own it, and it gets really fused with your identity, and so then you defend it, and then it just is this weird negotiation. If we're all pursuing wisdom, if we're pursuing truth together, which is inherently collaborative, you can't help but be more open-handed with what you're stumbling upon, inviting others into that space. It still requires vulnerability, but the threat to who you are is held by the group instead of by myself. Right. And surely, if that's part of the process, that seems to be one thing that in our classes and then in our churches we can model, right? Like we're here, we have all these different gifts and even roles, right? Like the pastor's role is different than the organist or the congregant or the whomever. The teacher's role is different than the student, but we're pursuing this truth as opposed to one of us has it and you all have to figure it out. Right. And I think, at least my, as a sort of parallel participant in this process, that was my observation of what energized. It seemed to be the group was energetic about it too. It wasn't just, okay, I'm listening, but somehow had a sustainable energy. And I think it's because of that. Like now we're in a shared project. We're a basketball team or a sports team or a soccer team and pursuing that project.
So let me just say something real quick, because it's going to stay with me, that one person in the room who I think was a student remarked to me that the impression that was left upon her yesterday in our all day together watching us was in a moment where I can't remember who was presenting, but somebody was presenting and everybody else sitting there had their pen and paper or their whatever, iPad, and we were all writing. And she said there was just something profoundly moving and beautiful about seeing everybody in this posture of a learner, like sort of like in humility saying, oh, you have something to teach me, or this captured my attention and I'm not too cool enough to actually take a note so I can remember it for next time. And I thought that was incredibly, encouraging. But it made me think, like, the meta purpose of us being theological educators, like, well, to what end do we write books and teach and do committees and, try to be faithful in our institutions and in local congregations? Like, what's the point of it all? And if it doesn't result in a deeper knowledge and love of God, a desire, pardon me for saying this, but a desire to be more like Jesus, which is to say more full of the fruit of the Spirit, and more capable of loving our neighbors, which is to say more fully alive as humans, to use Irenaeus. I don't know why we're doing this, but inasmuch as this process, this experiment enabled us as smarty pants scholars to be in these positions of more of a childlike disposition, was good for us. But if it inspires students to say, I want to love God more, I want to be more like Jesus, and I want to love my neighbor more deeply because I saw, for me, that's like, okay, then that's our calling. That's what we have to give our time, money, and energy to. Because otherwise, I don't understand, like, why? But that's just me.
I don't have anything better to say than that. So I am really thankful that you allowed me to be your co-designer, upender, face-to-face person. And really thank you for all your time, energy, and money and investment in this. I think it was great. Well done.
Thank you, sir.